We're recording. Let me start the webinar. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Welcome to the Digital Roundtable. Today is February 24th, and we are excited about the fact that we're going to have a deep analysis on what took place several weeks ago across the nation, primarily in Texas. It's been a very interesting time, and we have a great guest speaker returning by acclamation, John Wellinghoff. And so looking forward to hearing from John in a moment, but let's get rolling here with Dr. Butler inspiring us with some little chords of music to get in the mood. John? Beautiful, beautiful. That's
Very nice.
It's very soothing. It's very soothing. So John Butler, classes are back. You know, the rush is going on. Just tell me real quick how you doing today and how you fare from the storm.
I'm doing fine. Got my classes back because we had to redo all the syllabus to readjust all the exams. My electricity is back. It is 80 degrees. My yard was being done and went through quite an ordeal, but as an old Vietnam veteran like myself, it wasn't that bad. But what we did was we put on our Northwestern clothes, our graduate clothes, and I got a coat, takes the whole cow to make, and we bundled up and slept during the cold in the house. And we always had a little bit of hot water, and so we're fine.
Mm-hmm. Great, excellent. Llewellyn, how are you doing today? How is the weather over there?
Well, it seems to be very beautiful. It looks like the first day of spring, as it were. At least the sun is shining. The snow that was on the ground is melting quite remarkably fast. And there's every indication that it really is almost spring. So things are very fine in that sense. We're all hoping to get our shots and get mobilized again and come out of this strange isolation in which we've lived now for 1 full year almost. Come St. Patrick's Day, it'll be a full year that Linda and I have been basically locked away.
Yeah, well, you know, you and me both, we have been going through this infinite lockdown that apparently is never going to go away. So
we have one small advantage, and that is that Rhode Island is very beautiful. So there's a lot to look at, a lot of architecture, a lot of beaches and natural beauty, but we need destinations despite that. Yeah. Our prime destination at the moment is to drive to the dog park and watch the dogs running around. Well, you know, that's not quite how it's supposed to be, although yeah. I love dogs, and we have some of the best entertainers at the dog park where they run free and are crazy. I've just been reading, by the way, in an English publication that there are actually somewhere in the US, I think in Indiana, pigs playing computer games. They've rigged up a joystick. So I think these dogs here are behind the power curve. They should get on it too.
Fascinating.
Cats, we know, have been able to operate computers for a long time. Open the computer, if you have a cat, it'll be there in no time at all.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let me go back. Let me go to John Wellinghoff. John, thank you for being with us again. It's always a pleasure to see you.
It's great to see you too, Andreas. Thanks for having me on the show. And Llewellyn and John, good to see you both. You know, Llewellyn, if we can only teach those pigs to be crypto miners, you know, then we'd really have something going. But I hadn't heard that about the pigs and playing computer games. That's cool.
Next thing, I know, I think it's wonderful that they've got pigs. You tickle them in some place and they get going. The problem is all the ears flop over the. People have to be a bit more imaginative. They have to get the screens up so the pigs can really go at it. You know, Churchill said he liked pigs. He said, you know, cats were arrogant and dogs were always at your feet. A pig looked you straight in the eye, he said.
Fascinating.
Love it.
So let me cut to the chase for those listening to us. John Wellenhoff, or as I call him, JW. He is a superstar, an energy god, as I call him, a former FERC chairman and FERC commissioner and Nevada commissioner, and a lawyer by trade, and a physicist and mathematician by heart, and it's a phenomenal guy. And you all know, and that's why you're all listening to us today. We're going to discuss what happened here in this little storm that took 17 states down. No easy feat for any storm to take that many states down, but it happened. And there's all kinds of investigations going on. So John Wellenhoff, if you could put your FERC hat back on.
Yes.
What happened, John? And are we pushing the envelopes of the systems, and what's going on? What is your high level analysis of all this challenge?
Well, there's multiple things going on. I mean, and if we focus on Texas and the terrible tragedies in Texas, which are horrible, I really, sitting here in Berkeley where it's 60 degrees all the time, I really feel very bad for these people that had to suffer these outages and the extreme weather that they went through, and the deaths and other things that happened. It was horrible. But fundamentally what happened is somebody didn't listen. It's history repeating itself. When I was at FERC in 2011, there was a little problem in Texas. A bunch of gas wells froze, a bunch of gas plants, cooling pumps froze, and other things happened, and you had a huge blackout. So this happened in the past. It didn't happen as severely, certainly. Temperatures were much more severe than they were in 2011. In fact, my daughter, who lives in Austin, was saying that I guess it went down to 2 degrees in Austin. That's unbelievable. But nevertheless, you had a severe outage because of the cold. And we wrote a report because we didn't have jurisdiction to order anybody to do anything specifically about it, but we wrote a report in conjunction with NERC, basically indicating that certain steps need to be taken to weatherize these resources and facilities to ideally prevent it from happening again. Well, somebody didn't listen. I mean, I guess if we had to lay blame, and I really don't say this facetiously, we had to lay blame, I'd lay it right at the doorstep of Rick Perry. That's how I'd lay blame, Rick Perry, because ultimately he was governor at the time. He got the report, and they didn't do what they needed to do. As
I understand the details of history, the IPP owners, the generation CEOs, did write letters of mea culpa and committing to fix all the things back then, and apparently they didn't follow through.
Right. Somebody needed to have some oversight, some regulatory oversight, which would have been the state of Texas through the CPUC and through other regulatory agencies that certainly did have some level of control and, have done something. In the larger sense, though, also, I think Texas does need to look at considering becoming part of the rest of the United States. And Andres, I've said this for many years. I mean, this is not anything new. I've said this in Texas before big audiences. I've told people you need to interconnect with the rest of the U.S. because it's a good thing for you, and it would be a good thing for us. It would be a good thing for everybody if there were stronger interconnections into SPP, into the MISO area out to the east, and also into WEC as well. PJM was exporting 5,000 megawatts of power during this time of the major blackouts and the disruptions, exporting into TVA and into other parts in the southeast. But nevertheless, there were exports available. but Texas could not avail itself of those exports, and that's, looking at hindsight, that's something that only can be done going forward in the future.
Yeah.
But these weatherization activities that could have been undertaken, that could have been done.
Mhm.
These plants could have been hardened for the weather in ways that you wouldn't have seen as many gas plants go off, and some of the wind turbines as well. But certainly there was much more gas and wind. But all of these things can be hardened. I mean, I've seen wind turbines operate in Canada and Minnesota. Doesn't mean that they can't operate either.
Right.
So they can certainly be made to operate in those kind of conditions.
There was another set of things that are happening. So the ERCOT board of directors is made up of half of the members don't live in the state.
Right.
And tell us, John, all the other ISOs and RTOs, they have a similar, makeup of the board, right? And in some cases, the board is primarily outsiders, right?
The only ISO RTO where all the members are residents of the state where the ISO is located, and there's only 2 ISOs other than Texas that are only within the boundaries of a state jurisdiction. That's California and New York. The California ISO has only in-state residents. I'm not sure the California ISO operates any better because of that, though. But all the other ones, including New York, and certainly the ones that are multi-state, have boards of directors that are from all kinds of places, and even boards of directors that are not within the region. I'm sure that PGM, MISO, and SPP have members of their boards of directors that are not within strictly the PGM, the MISO, or the SPP state. So it's completely unclear to me how having a member of the board of directors of an independent nonprofit corporation that operates the grid from the state where that grid is going to make that board of directors any better or worse. I don't understand that. It seems very political to me.
Yeah. And clearly, John, the other thing that I think is worth exploring with you, being a DER czar now, is the notion that, I find it interesting that because when we did the grid in Austin, 2/3 of the meters at Austin are connect-disconnect meters.
Mhm.
So the utility, when it went on into releasing load to keep the balance of the grid for ERCOT,
Yes.
they could have done that, but they didn't. And neither did CenterPoint, neither did Encore, neither did Texas. They all chose to disconnect non-critical feeders.
Right.
What's your sense of that? Why are they still doing that when they should be doing something differently?
Yeah, and you're suggesting they could have done a rotational disconnects ultimately that would have been rotating blackouts and or brownouts rather than simply the
Yep.
critical feeders. And by the way, my daughter is happy. She lives near a high school, a junior high school, and a hospital because she was on a critical feeder and never had an outage in Austin. But despite that, I don't know why they're not making better use of the technology, Andres. You're absolutely right. That technology is there. It should be utilized to make it easier for all consumers across the system.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, and I hadn't heard why they chose to do it in that manner.
Yeah, I asked the question, sort of to the insiders, and the answer was, this is how we've been doing it for 50 years.
Yeah, even though the technology has changed radically as far as their capabilities, and so doesn't that kind of say, well, I mean, doesn't relate to Austin. Certainly, Austin as a municipal utility, but certainly any of the investor-owned utilities. So, how used and useful is that technology, right? Why should we be paying for that technology if you're not using it effectively, right?
Right, that's right. I mean, I think that should be definitely one of the reviews in terms of, because I think a big part of it, John, again, let's all agree that the storm was a unprecedented storm.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not so sure that ERCOT could have done any better than it did. In fact, as I understand it, per my own assessment as an engineer, the system performed as it is designed.
Yes, it did. I'm sure it did from an engineering standpoint and from a market standpoint. I mean, the New York Times 2 days ago had a front page above the fold article that was written about Texas that, in good part placed the blame on your competitive wholesale market. And I actually called up the reporter from the New York Times and explained to him that it wouldn't have mattered if there was a market or was a rate regulated system. The same thing would have happened. The exact same thing would have happened because those plants were not weatherized in a way that would have allowed them to have continued to provide service. It wouldn't have mattered if you had a rate regulated system or not.
That's right. That's right.
Well, let me ask you a question. If we go back and look at the national transportation, and when there's an airplane accident, we learn from that. And so we had an engine to fall off of an airplane, and all the planes were grounded. And one thing about flight is, since the turn of the last century, we have learned, and it's now probably one of the safest modes of transportation. So what I'm hearing you saying is that if we take the exact same kind of attitude toward what just happened,
right?
How in the world could you not take the advice of your report? It would be an outrage if we were to fly an airplane that had crashed and we did not learn from it.
Well, and I understand. There is someone, there's a woman in East Texas who's filed $100 million suit. And that's got to start hopefully getting people's attention that if they're not going to pay attention to what is known or should have been known back in 2011 and do something about it, then there should be some liability. There should be some legal liability for those individuals who, in fact, did not heed that advice.
Right.
Well, that's certainly true for Boeing and other lines. I wonder if it's true for a state. I don't know who can sue.
It gets a little bit more difficult with the state, given that often states have immunity in a lot of instances. It gets so somehow we have to be able to place legal liability and assess that legal liability in ways that will ensure, because that's what happens with airplanes. Obviously, airplane goes down once, and something happens, it should be fixed, but it goes down a second time and there's going to be, $100 million lawsuits flying all over.
Right. And the other thing is that nobody except Andre and I ever heard of ERCOT. It's like, it's like going to war with a country never heard of, and all of a sudden you say, where's that country? So people were calling and asking me, what is that? I've never heard of it before. So
like to make
we have a situation now where people are aware of another agency that they were not absolutely aware of before.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
There is a question about why we as a society do not take threat seriously, and aircraft are not blameless. The air traffic system or the air system has its own weaknesses. I was for many years a private pilot, and we would sit around when the hijackings began. We would sit around these little pilot lounges at different airports saying, why don't they put locks on the cockpits? Why are we letting people into the cockpits? And nothing happened. And we would not have had 9/11 if we had hardened the cockpits. And it was known. When I asked Jack Gibbons, who had been the presidential science advisor during some of this, he said rather sort of, oh, I should have done something about that. I'm sorry I didn't. That is incredible. We put so much effort into looking at why there is a failure in aviation, and how was a glaring, obvious failure with a simple, simple lock from the hardware store could have done the trick, and it wasn't done. I also think there's something else you're up against, which is an engineering idea of maximum credible design, maximum credible failure rate, and that people just don't want to believe it can happen. Engineers design against something. They've got to design against something. You can't have a machine that lasts for 1,000 years. You must design against some failure. And somehow I think that was part of the system. Given, as John said, you had a wake-up call in 2011. It was incredible. But the airlines had lots of wake-up calls about hijackings, and nothing was done when a simple lock could have made a huge difference.
Let me
So it becomes almost a question of why do we do stupid things and then do them some more?
Yes.
let me answer a question that was posted here by Brian Huey. Hello, Brian. So the reason the ERCOT is not interconnected to the Eastern interconnect or the Western interconnect, as John is suggesting it should, is because ERCOT and back then LBJ and politically back then in the 60s, ERCOT in Texas wanted to remain independent and not be under the jurisdiction of FERC. So that's the reason why we're not interconnected. The reason FERC exists is to manage the interconnection, intrastate commerce of electricity as one of the things. And so we don't have intrastate commerce, so then we're not subject to FERC rules. Right?
Yeah, okay.
Right. So the state of Texas now needs to weigh that against, not only, the potential risks that it has and risks that it's already seen. But I think there's another side that I've talked about as well, and that's the upside. I think if Texas were interconnected with these other jurisdictions and could not only import power when it needed, but it could also export power. I mean, there's many times when all that wind in West Texas is just, too much to be able to be utilized, and it's being curtailed. And so instead of curtailing it, those wind farms in essence could export to the west or export, to the east, and ultimately provide more revenues for those developers and for the state of Texas.
Absolutely.
Well, it would be interesting to see how it comes out, because the other interrelated thing is, okay, do I order my Tesla now? Do I continue to go on the road to electricity and carbon neutral and et cetera? Or do we rely more on fossil fuels going forward? I think that when we look at things, we know what we need to do and what we should do. But I think if you look at policy and we ask this question, what is the impact of what happened in Texas and other states on our whole imagination going forward about how we will get around? Will we return and make sure that fossil fuels are available? Will we go back and say we're going to continue our route toward electric vehicles? And for the people who went through that, it was fossil fuels who literally allowed them to stay alive. So I think there are interconnected ideas about what we should do in the future. One is we should do like the airlines, at least there's the perception, Llewellyn, that when we get on a flight, if it had some problems, it was taken out of service. But I just wonder what would be the overall idea of how we look at fueling things in the future. Will this process in Texas and the weather have a big impact when we would say, bring on some more fossil fuels? What do you think it's going to be?
I don't think that's necessary at all. As John said, he had seen wind turbines operating very satisfactorily in the far north of Canada. I've seen them in Scandinavia, where they're part of the systems and they work very well in sub-zero conditions because they're designed for it.
Now,
and they're weatherized to accommodate it. If you don't weatherize, you will have the problem.
Let me, Llewellyn, real quick. I just want to set the record straight on the engineering side of things. So in the event that we just saw happen, the shortfall was 30 gigawatts of power that didn't come online. the bulk of that power that didn't come online was all from thermal generation, natural gas power plants, but also from wind. Now, the peak needed to cover was 74 gigawatts, roughly. And the wind participation on that 74 gigawatt need was only 8 gigawatts. So, not all the winds went down with weatherization. Many were working fine, but only 8 gigawatts were available of all the wind turbines that are at some point in the summer even delivering 40 gigawatts. So remember that part of the challenge here with solar and wind is that the weather and the wind and the conditions of ice and snow get in the way of the production of that. So the challenge remains, how do we deliver that 74 gigawatts without using coal, natural gas, and nuclear? And so go ahead, John, and intercede now.
Well, yeah, you have to plan for it. Ultimately, it doesn't mean you can't plan for it. So, and I think from the amount forecasted, I think the wind provided to ERCOT, a good portion of what ERCOT had forecasted was going to be available from the wind. So it wasn't, ERCOT didn't expect 40 gigawatts to be available. That comes about in the summertime in certain high wind periods. So we certainly do have to have resource adequacy, but I think that resource adequacy can in fact be provided by wind and solar and storage and behind the meter resources, demand response. You talk about, John, your Tesla. If you would have had a Tesla during this period in Texas and been able to go V to G to provide grid services out to the grid at the prices in the market, you would have paid for your Tesla in a week. So you could have paid for the whole car.
Right.
So ultimately, if we can provide an integrated plan to have these resources work together, I think we can get there. I mean, we can't go to fossil fuel. We can't go back to fossil fuels because part of the reason we had the weather 2 degrees in Austin was because of fossil fuels ultimately. And the more fossil fuels we continue to have, the more of those events are going to happen. So, it's a self perpetuating cycle to the extent that we continue to burn carbon and put it into our atmosphere. We've got to take it out of the atmosphere. We have to find ways to do that.
Yeah.
And doing that means reducing the amount of coal and gas.
Yeah, John, let me go to some of the questions online and see if we can answer them. So there is a question posted by Ellie Rustling. Thank you, Ellie. And this question has to do with, do we know, and I don't think none of us do, but is it possible, JW, that some gaming was done, that some of these IPPs, didn't show up and faked that they could show up and waited for the price to gouge to 9,000? Have we ever seen anything like that before? I mean, is there such a conspiracy theory possibility on that?
Well, we don't know. Some of that could have taken place. Yes, there could have been actors who were not ones who their plants, because of not being weatherized, had to be taken offline, who could have had their plant online, who decided, well, maybe we have a number of other plants that do operate, but if I take a couple of these other ones offline, the prices will go up so high that I'll make an amount of money that will make up for that plus more. Yes, and we saw that during Enron, the Enron situation in California in the 2000-2001 period. There were people who were withholding. Whether or not there was improper withholding, I don't know. I don't know what kind of market oversight ERCOT and the CPUC have. I know FERC has a very effective market oversight in place, I believe. I helped increase that and strengthen that when I was at FERC. By the time I left, we had 200 people in our oversight office. Plus we had market monitors embedded in every single ISO RTO in the country. So we can't discount that might been part of it, but as I understand it, it was not the large portion of the problem. The large
So-
portion of the problem was legitimate lack of adequate weatherization of natural gas plants.
Yeah,
JW, can I ask a question?
quick
Uh,
follow
would
up.
it com-
Hold
would
on,
it-
hold on, quick follow up, please. So John, real quick. So is it fair to say that there will be an investigation? Should that be the right steps?
Well, there should be investigation on the part of the Texas authorities who have authority over the market. FERC does not have authority over
Right.
the market in Texas, and can't. FERC certainly should lend some expertise. There are great analysts in
Yeah.
the FERC market enforcement office that could review the data to help decide that.
Sure. Go ahead, Llewellyn.
JW, would a
Yes.
capacity market be introduced in Texas? Would that help?
Capacity market could help potentially in Texas, or either a capacity market or some resource adequacy construct. California doesn't have a capacity market, but they do have a resource adequacy requirement where the California Public Utilities Commission requires that each load serving entity demonstrate that they have adequate resources contracted to meet their load needs to some degree, although obviously it failed this summer. We had some blackouts this summer here in Texas, but at least there is a structure in place that's designed to ensure that there are adequate resources to meet, high critical stress events on the grid. So either a capacity market or a resource adequacy structure or something, that can ensure that resource adequacy reliability, I think is needed in Texas, Llewellyn. I think you're correct.
Yeah, we do have a large market. So this was one of the challenges that I pointed out in one of my comments on LinkedIn, John, JW, that ERCA was running at a very thin 3%.
Reserve margin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is not a lot of margin, right?
Yeah, that's sort of skating on the edge of it. You're right.
Yeah. We have another question from a former commissioner, David O'Brien. Hi, David. He says, in terms of percentage, how much of the cost of a major outage like this is a failure of market design, technology, utility processes, or Mother Nature?
Well, it's hard to put, precise percentages, but I think most of it is on Mother Nature and utility process or utility oversight processes, i.e., not taking the 2011 report and ensuring that there was, in fact, the strong weatherization that was recommended in that report actually done and following through. So it would have been oversight by regulators and Mother Nature, I think, is probably 90% of the issue here.
Well, so let me follow up with the aftermath, JW. So now, as I understand it, there are hearings on Thursday, and the sky's falling kind of hearings, right? But here's the interesting thing of what's happening, and I'd love to hear your how this is going to get resolved. So because the price went to 9,000, a lot of people are being charged for that delta while they consume the energy. So for example, as I understand it, many cities right now in America, Austin, San Antonio, Denton, that are municipally owned utilities,
right?
They are on the hook for hundreds of millions of dollars for that delta.
Yes.
And there are 25 retail energy providers who have declared bankruptcy.
Yes.
So what is going to happen there, JW? How do we fix the fact that that is an artificial price for a period of time, that if the ceiling was 4,000 or 2,000 versus the 9,000, I mean, who pays that bill? How does that work out?
Well, who pays the bill? The entities who are responsible for the bill should pay it ultimately. I mean, they're all market participants. They should have tried to had some hedges in place to hedge that ultimately. Whether or not such hedges would have been available, I don't know, and I haven't looked at it. So who pays the bill? That's going to have to be a regulatory decision made by the CPUC ultimately of how those bills are going to actually get paid. But going forward, what you do is I think you move to where Llewellyn's talking about is you go to a capacity market construct or some kind of resource adequacy construct that allows you then to put caps on the energy prices going forward so that that kind of a situation doesn't happen. Every other RTO in the country, except for Texas, that has an energy market, well, they all have energy markets, have a cap that doesn't allow prices to go to those levels ultimately. And they have either a capacity market or some kind of a resource adequacy construct that also ensures that you're not going to reach those levels for extended periods of time because people have provided for the resource to meet the needs of the loads. And so therefore prices don't spike because there's no resources available. So you have to fix the problem going forward, certainly with some kind of a market restructuring. But what's going to happen to those people that, are getting the bills now? I can't tell you. And you're right. Municipal jurisdictions that are participating in ERCOT, like Austin, probably have huge bills. And there are retail customers as well in Texas that have huge bills, both residential, some of them that went with this company called Gritty, and others that probably are not hedged, but just, engage in trading the market on their own, like large industrials. There's probably large industrials and commercial. Be interesting to see where Walmart is, because I think Walmart is their own scheduling coordinator and participates independently in the market to buy power for their stores in Texas. So it'd be very interesting to see what Walmart's bill is, or whether or not they somehow had some hedge. I don't know, again, how you would hedge against this kind of an extreme weather event, but it'd be very interesting to see what Walmart's bill is.
So let me dig deeper on that to get your feedback again. So customers, consumers, you and me,
Yes.
I have a contract with my utility and I only pay whatever it is, 10 cents, 9 cents, 5 cents, right? So I'm not going to see that bill. My bill is going to be a normal bill.
Right, unless you're like with a company like Gritty that actually lets you see those real prices. Yeah.
But so it is my provider that is potentially in trouble here. It could
could go out of business. Yeah.
Yeah. So what would happen in that scenario, JW? Would others come in and, like in the banking crisis, be asked to acquire the assets of those players?
Yeah, yes, and in Texas they do have a provision for what they call a POLR, a provider of last resort. In fact, I believe the POLR in Texas is Vistra.
Yes.
And so I think Vistra will be taking several 100,000 customers in Texas from all these entities that are no longer financially viable and have the ability to ultimately do that. So there is a structure to take care of those customers, and Texas has provided for that in its retail structure, and that's a good thing. But there should be, other mechanisms to provide for hedges and provide for other ways that these customers and these commercial enterprises are not hurt.
Yeah. So JW, what do you think on that side of the equation? How do we move to the notion of an interconnected or more robust microgrid, DER at the edge? What needs to happen? I mean, and you and I have talked about this, that the opportunity here on redesigning infrastructure since you left FERC, it's really a re-engineering of the constructs on policy.
Right.
This is a perfect time for JW's memoir. So what do we do here? What do we do, John, really?
Well, we do, I believe, ensure that distributed resources and microgrids, have um, better access to and better interaction with the grid, so that what what are the benefits that those resources can provide are fully compensated. I mean, if we would have had more distributed resources, like I say, if you had Teslas that could have been plugged in and ultimately provided V2G, vehicle to grid services during this time, there would have been less of a crisis. I'm not saying the whole crisis could have been averted, but certainly, with large enough levels of electric vehicles on the grid, you could have massive amounts of storage available.
Right.
But those assets have to have number one, have to have a policy structure where they can participate effectively, and number two, have to have a financial structure where they're compensated adequately to participate. So you need the state of Texas needs to make sure that it has both the policy structures and the financial structures to encourage those kinds of things to be built and expand. And to the
Right.
extent that they can be built and do expand, then we'll have a more reliable, more stable grid, because
Right.
those things will show up. They'll show up when they need to show up, and they'll provide the services that will take the stress off of the fossil fuel generators that can't show up, or the wind turbines that may not have been weatherized, or whatever there may have been that caused the system to fall apart.
Yeah. So
Okay.
is it fair to say, JW, that order 841 and order 2222 are the vehicles to enable that?
They are outside of Texas, but
know.
because Texas is not under FERC's jurisdiction, Texas is going to have to put their own 841 and 2222 in place. And 841 is the storage order, the behind the meter storage order that sets up structures to do exactly what I'm talking about, ensure that consumers can fully and adequately interconnect that storage, and also provide it for services out to the grid. And then 2222 is the order with respect to all distributed resources, not only storage, but rooftop solar, combined heat and power, and cogen, all things that can be behind the meter, be utilized for consumer purposes, but also provide services out to the grid, ensure that there's full integration of those kinds of services. So FERC is really starting to move, in the right direction. And I have to give, Republican former Chairman Chatterjee a lot of credit for both 841. He didn't initiate it, but he carried it on. And then 2222, which he did initiate, he really has moved the ball forward. And so Texas needs to ensure that they're doing things like that, or if they become interconnected with the rest of the country, they'll automatically become part of that.
Now, John, real quick, order 841 came out in January of 2018, if I'm right.
That's correct.
In order 2222 came out in September of last year.
That's correct.
Those orders are still not deployed in any other jurisdiction. How long does it take for this to happen?
Well, and unfortunately, it's not quick. If we had a more uniform market system across the U.S., in fact, there is a very famous Texan who wanted to put a uniform market system across the U.S. called Standard Market Design, Pat Wood. If we had that kind of a system put in place, it would be much easier and quicker. But as it is, each RTO now has to come up with their compliance plans for those orders, submit those compliance plans to FERC for approval, they review them, and then they have to go back and be implemented. And that can often take, a year or more to happen. It is happening with 841. 841, a lot of those compliance plans are in place, and a lot of the RTOs have 841 implementation activities underway. 2222, it's not yet. The compliance plans are due in June. Some entities like MISO have already asked take a while to get these things in place because each of the RTOs have their own tariffs and business practice manuals that are all different.
Llewellyn and JB, any questions?
Well, you know
Well,
what?
I do. First of all, just for clarification, what is VISTRA, John? What does it stand for? The last resort.
Vistra is the name of what was Texas Utilities, I believe. They're the parent company, or the retail arm, in essence, of Texas Utilities. That was the old investor-owned utility
Yes.
that under restructuring was broken up, and so they are a large retail provider in Texas that is just one of the companies that they have enough financial backing that they can take on these other customers from the other retailers. Yeah.
Good, I understand. And tell me, what sort of design would you come up with for Texas? What would you say? Would you say come under the FERC umbrella, build the interconnections, or would you say modify what you have so that you don't have a replication of this crisis?
I think Texas should seriously consider, in all seriousness, coming under FERC and having strong connections in with very, very firmly that if they did so, there would be tremendous benefits, not only in reliability and resilience to Texas, but also economically in their ability to export the vast amounts of variable renewable generation that they have that cannot be always used effectively in Texas, but can be exported to other areas as well. And they would have the benefit of these rules already being in place, Order 841, 2222, that they could adopt into their ERCOT system to be able to be utilized to, again, do what Andreas and I were discussing, and that is enhance the adoption and deployment of the
Obviously, John, at some point, electricity supply becomes a national security issue.
Yes.
Very much so. We saw that in the Texas blackout. Do you feel that there should be a federal storage initiative? Should there be a federal initiative to store electricity, to develop technologies that will store electricity, to get us off this patchwork? It's very well believing that electric vehicles, and they are an asset if you have enough of them, but it's hardly something you can rely a whole nation on.
Well, I think we do need to continue to advance our efforts in the technology area of storage. And certainly hydrogen is one that a lot of people are looking into, although I think most hydrogen storage should be local. I'm not really big on large hydrogen pipelines going all over. I think there's multiple problems associated with that. But I think hydrogen is a very prospective storage technology that certainly we should continue to have federal R&D go into. And there perhaps are other storage technologies. Lots of them have been talked about, pumped hydro, but it has a lot of environmental issues with respect to it, and others. But I think the most potential economic one is ultimately hydrogen.
Yeah. John, do you see a comeback of any kind of form of nuclear technology?
Well, and I know Bill Gates is very big on this and has put lots of money into small reactors. Certainly the existing technology, large scale reactors, I think are very problematic. First of all, my home state is Nevada. So, the waste isn't going there. And I don't think Texas wants it either. So, that's an inextricable problem. But the other inextricable problem is, those two Vogtle plants in Georgia that are being built by Southern Company, they cost $20 billion. And so, and that's the overnight cost. That's not the rate base cost of service, lifetime cost of probably over $60 billion once you get through paying all the return on the investment to Southern Company. So, at $20 billion, what is that as a bus bar cost? Bus bar cost of that power from those nuke plants is somewhere north of 9 cents. Well, you can put in a whole lot of wind and a whole lot of solar, plus all the storage you want for half that price. So I really don't see nuclear going forward, given the cost and the waste issues. I don't see how those issues have been resolved effectively.
Can I chime in on that? I'm a bit of a supporter of nuclear, and I would point out that we're going to have nuclear waste so long as we have nuclear defense. It's not going away. We're going to have submarines, aircraft carriers, and of course weapons. And there's already a lot of weapons grade plutonium floating around in Texas. The Pantex facility is there, where weapons are disassembled and assembled. So that's not solvable by not building nuclear power. It's solvable by a scientific answer, which we don't really have at the moment. The other thing is a lot of utilities, particularly I beg your pardon, in Phoenix, are looking at nuclear as a way of making hydrogen so that you don't have the variability. They can make the hydrogen, and with small modular reactors, the things that Bill Gates is talking about, you have very high temperatures. It doesn't work if you don't have the high temperature. An ordinary light water reactor, the temperatures aren't high enough. But if you start making hydrogen at 600 degrees, it becomes a lot cheaper to make the hydrogen because it's a heat process, the electrolysis. The Europeans are hell-bent on hydrogen. They're going to make it in the North Sea with, they hope, a new generation of electrolyzers that is going to use surplus wind power, but no heat generated, which means that the amount of electricity used will be greater, and to use the slack time. And they have some advantage in that, at least in Holland, they have a pipeline system that may be able to accommodate hydrogen. And you're quite right, hydrogen needs to be made where it's going to be used. It doesn't transport well. It attacks, as I understand it, I'm no scientist, but it attacks plastic piping. It has an effect on steel piping, and it's a very small, slippery molecule. So you need extra good plumbing, and it can have, in its burning, produce NOx. You have to work around that. And also, it can explode in certain circumstances. So it can't be treated as a one-on-one substitution for natural gas, but it's a very interesting way to store energy, in my view. And I would think that nuclear has a role in that, to use any surplus power to make hydrogen where it's going to be used, in the service territory of the utility that is going to use it, or even very close to parts of the service territory rather than a territory-wide idea.
Let me, John Butler, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was going to go back to the original question of what we would do in the future. And I think that it's got to be tied to a policy deal. On one hand, a lot of my neighbors saying it was a random walk, statistically, it walked away from the mean, it's going to walk right back. Others are saying, how can we get a policy going forward? And I happen to think when we connect it to the opportunity structure, to the ability to draw enterprises to, for example, Texas or to America, to keep Tesla in Austin, then when you connect that policy to the ability to do business and provide jobs, then I think that's when Texas started to talk about hooking up with the rest of America, sharing resources with the rest of America. I'm just thinking from a policy point of view, sitting around a table and saying, was this a random walk? And what do we do in the future? And I think you got to tie it to a practical thing in Texas, like business, enterprise, and jobs, not just being told.
JW, before you jump on that, let me say a couple of things on that. So I think that the opportunity here is to have Texas look inside at first in hardening things, on unleashing 841, 2222, on empowering DR planning and management and integration, vehicle to grid, all of the above. And one of the things that I pointed out in my book in 2011, you wrote a foreword on the 2015 edition about what I call positive energy buildings. So what do you think of the idea? And you were the chief policy officer of SolarCity, and you know Elon Musk. What do you think is the idea long-term of buildings becoming mini power plants and with vehicles attached to all that? And is that the right future? And how do we accelerate that, John? How do we do that?
Well, first I want to say, I agree with John and on the policy and the jobs, and you got to bring it to real practical, an enterprise thing for Texas that they're going to join in with interconnect with the rest of the country. They've got to see the real benefits of doing that. And I think that, and Llewellyn on the hydrogen, obviously I agree. And I'm not, want to make clear, I'm not not against nuclear technology, but I think that the technology we have now is not sufficient. We have to push ahead with newer, as you say, higher temperature, small reactors that are more cost effective. But on your question, Andres, I think absolutely. I think we do need to upgrade our buildings, and these buildings do need to become prosumers, not just consumers of energy, and they need to be not only microgrids but mini grids and be able to island themselves. I mean, I'm here in Berkeley, California. I've got 5 kilowatts of solar on my roof for the last 5 years. I just put 3 more on, and I've got 2 Tesla Powerwalls in the garage, and so I don't have to worry about the wildfires. But ultimately, not everybody can do that, obviously, but we have to enable consumers to be able to upgrade their structures and new structures to make them as productive as possible as a part of the solution to the overall energy issues, and not part of the problem.
Right. Yeah. So is it fair to say, JW, that people talk about the success of the Nordic countries, what's going on in Norway and Finland with electrification, and obviously California has all these mandates now. Every new house that gets built in California needs to have a solar rooftop and so on, and the PSC there has mandates on energy storage. It seems like the pieces of what needs to be done are being tried in the UK, in Northern Europe, here in the US, in Australia. We have the constructs, right?
Yeah, we have the constructs. It's just a matter of how we put that together as a nation, and how we come together as a nation for an overall energy policy that is effective is going to be the challenge. Because we do have tremendous amount of independence in our states, and Texas is probably the best example of that. And how we can, respect that independence, but at the same time pull all together for the national policy and really truly the policies of the world that we need to have a decarbonized future.
Mm-hmm. I really want to thank you, John Wellinghoff, for being with us today. It's always a pleasure to see you. Want to remind everybody that John is the original inductee into the Digital 360 Summit Hall of Fame. And he's a superstar in my book, and I love the guy, and look forward to the phone calls that are going to be flying from Texas to your office. Hopefully,
I'm sure there will be. Well, we love you too, Andreas.
Hopefully they'll seek some wisdom from you. Butler and Llewellyn, any parting thoughts and any last comments or anything?
It's going to be interesting to see how we adjust from a policy point of view going forward. Obviously, people are angry. Obviously, people think something needs to be done. And now we know what ERCOT is. It is now a household name. So it will be very interesting to see how we go forward with the policy issues, where Texas ends up, if it interacts with the rest of the country. And remember, we're also connected to Mexico. So there's going to be some interesting kinds of dialogues going forward.
I would just like to say that this warning shot out of Texas, if you can treat it as a warning shot, just points up the huge vulnerability of city and urban populations without electricity. How very quickly life as we know it grinds to a halt. No water, no heat, no light, very shortly no food, no machine, no pumps to pump gasoline. How extraordinarily exposed urban populations are if the electric grid fails, and why that should be a national priority at all times and part of our concept of national defense.
Yes.
Agreed. Agreed. Thank you, gentlemen. John Butler, do you have your wonderful guitar
I do,
nearby?
I'm thinking about memories I need to get rid of, as that's sprinkled with the blues. Got a few old dreams that I can't use. Fooled by my memories of things that used to be. There were the smiles before the tears, and with the smiles some better years. Fooled by my memories of things that used to be. When I remember how things were, all my memories and even her, I like to start this year anew, but memories just make me blue. And a cottage small, built for two, and a garden wall with violets blue, fooled by my memories of things that used to be. Let's get some of those old memories out of here. Let's go on to a new year.
Well done. Well done. Thank you very much for listening to the
And
digital
thank you, John.
today. Thank you.
Yes.
Stick around and stick around.